My name is Olivia Chandler, Lieutenant Commander, Naval Intelligence. The night they put handcuffs on me, every camera in the ballroom turned my way. I remember the weight of 1,000 eyes, the click of metal around my wrists, and the taste of copper in my mouth. I didn't cry. I didn't plead. I just stood there in my dress uniform under the golden chandeliers, trying to breathe through the silence that followed. Then I heard his voice, my father's voice. He raised his glass of whiskey and said clearly enough for every microphone to catch it, "I'm the one who reported her." The room gasped like it had been slapped. For a second, I thought I had imagined it, but the smirk on his face was real, small and satisfied, the kind he wore when he thought he'd taught me a lesson. Reporters leaned forward, flashes started popping, and I realized this was not a mistake. He wanted to be seen. He wanted to be the hero who turned in his own daughter. The cameras loved it. A retired officer exposing a traitor. A perfect story. My story. I kept my spine straight and my hands still, even as my heartbeat turned into a drum in my throat. People whispered. Some in disbelief. Others in awe. I could feel the judgment wrapping around me like smoke. The same men who once saluted me were now staring as if I had stolen their medals. I met no one's eyes, not even my mother's. She sat 2 tables away, frozen, pretending not to know either of us. The music had died. The air smelled like perfume and burnt shame. When the federal agents read the charges, their voices echoed off marble and glass. Lieutenant Commander Olivia Chandler, you are under arrest for treason. Treason. The word hung there, heavy and final. I had faced missiles, interrogations, and nights that smelled like diesel and salt. But nothing burned like that single word from my father's mouth. He didn't look at me again. He just kept his glass raised as they led me off stage. The applause that followed wasn't real applause. It was the sound of relief. People clapping because someone else's downfall made their world feel safe again. My heels clicked against the floor, steady and slow. If I had learned anything from him, it was how to walk tall when everything else collapses. Behind me, the photographers shouted questions. Did you do it? Was it worth it? How does it feel to betray your country? I didn't answer. The truth had no place in that room. The truth was too quiet to compete with flashbulbs. Outside, the night air hit me like cold glass. The city lights blurred through tears I refused to let fall. Somewhere inside that building, my father was still smiling, soaking in the applause of strangers. He had waited his whole life for an audience. And now he had one. I looked up at the flag, fluttering above the entrance. The same flag he'd taught me to salute before I could spell my own name. He said duty meant everything. That loyalty was sacred. Maybe he just forgot that loyalty works both ways. That night wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of the truth. He couldn't destroy. Because humiliation isn't defeat. It's the fire that tests what you're made of. And as the car door slammed behind me and the lights faded, I promised myself one thing. If he wanted a war, he'd finally get one. But this time, I would fight for the truth. My father didn't believe in bedtime stories. He believed in discipline. At 6, I was learning how to tie maritime knots in our backyard, while other kids were still learning how to ride bikes. If I messed up, he didn't explain. He barked. He'd stand over me, arms crossed, telling me to try again, while my fingers turned red from the rope. He said it was to make me strong. But even then, I could feel it wasn't about strength. It was about control. Every lesson came with a side of humiliation, masked as tough love. I once scraped my knees, trying to lift a duffel half my weight. He looked at me and said, "No one's going to carry your burden for you." Then he walked away. At the time, I told myself he was making me ready for the world, that this was what love looked like in our house. No hugs, no praise, just tests. I didn't realize until years later that those tests weren't for me. They were for him. Proof he still had power in a world that had moved on without him. The older I got, the more I saw the cracks in his armor. His medals hung crooked on the living room wall, collecting dust. He told war stories with more bitterness than pride. When I was accepted into the Naval Academy, he didn't show up to graduation. My mom mailed me a photo of the empty seat with a note that just said, "He stayed home." Oh, at first, I thought he was trying to protect me from disappointment. Then I understood he just couldn't handle my success. He saw it as a mirror he didn't want to look into. Every accomplishment of mine became a reminder of what he lost. The Navy took his career, and I had made it my future. He never said he was proud. Not once. Even after my first deployment, when I came home in one piece, he just stared at my uniform and said, "You think wearing white makes you better than me?" I told him I was just doing the job he taught me to love. He snapped back, "I taught you obedience, not ambition." That's when I knew. This wasn't about duty or family. It was about keeping me small enough to make him feel tall. I kept trying to reach him for years, but you can't connect with someone who only sees you as a threat. His pride was louder than his love. Still, some part of me kept hoping he'd change. That maybe one day he'd see me as something more than competition. But hope gets quiet over time. It shrinks under every missed call, every sarcastic jab, every time he looked through me like I was someone else's child. By the time he turned me in, I had already lost him. That night wasn't a betrayal. It was just the final confirmation of something I had felt my whole life. That I was never his daughter. I was his replacement. The email showed up at 2:14 a.m. No subject line, no sender ID. I opened it because I thought it might be from command, maybe an early briefing. Instead, I saw coordinates from a classified defense route, one only a few officers had access to. My stomach clenched. At the bottom was my own encrypted signature. I stared at the screen, willing it to make sense. There had to be a mistake, some glitch. I scanned the headers, the data trail, and the encryption keys. Everything pointed back to me. It was my account, my credentials, my fingerprint. But I hadn't sent it. I hadn't even been on that server that day. Within the hour, my secure line rang. The voice on the other end was clipped and formal. "Lieutenant Commander Chandler, report to headquarters. Immediate compliance is required." No explanation, no time to process. Just that low, heavy tone that told me this wasn't protocol. This was a trap, already in motion. At HQ, the hallways felt colder than usual. People glanced at me, then away. I walked into the briefing room and saw two agents, suits dark, eyes dull from too many hours without sleep. One slid a folder toward me. Inside was a printout of the email I'd just seen. Same text, same signature, the same proof that someone had built a perfect digital version of me. I sat still, heart pounding, trying to hold on to logic, but the facts were too precise. This wasn't a random breach. It was a replica. Someone had mirrored my entire identity and used it to leak top-tier intel. And in a system like ours, where keystrokes leave deeper wounds than bullets, that was enough to label me a traitor. The room smelled like recycled air and cold metal. My hands were steady, but my thoughts spun wild. I wasn't just under investigation. I was being erased. From the inside out, the interrogation room was too quiet, the kind of silence that eats at your nerves. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, pale and unforgiving. I sat across from two agents, their suits sharp, their expressions carved from stone. One pushed a thin folder toward me and said, "Your father has provided testimony." My pulse stuttered. I thought I misheard him. My father? The man who taught me about honor? The agent didn't hesitate. He opened the folder, revealing a sworn statement, signed in his trembling handwriting. "He claims you were accessing files beyond your clearance," the agent said, "that you were hiding data from oversight." The words blurred for a second before sinking in like cold water. He hadn't just turned on me. He'd built the noose himself. I felt my throat tighten, but I forced my voice steady. "You really think I'd betray my oath?" The second agent didn't look up. He slid another sheet across the table. We also have a corroborating statement from Lieutenant Sarah Monroe. I blinked. Sarah. The same officer I'd once mentored. The same one I'd disciplined for leaving her terminal unsecured. Her testimony was short but sharp, saying, I often bypassed security layers and dismissed chain of command protocols. Every word sounded rehearsed, like someone had handed her the script. I could almost hear my father's voice feeding her the lines. My chest felt hollow, my breath shallow. The people I had trusted most were now tools in a story I didn't write. I wanted to fight back, to throw the papers and shout that this was all fabricated, but I knew emotion would only prove them right. So I sat still, jaw locked, staring at the signatures that sealed my fate. The agents exchanged a glance that said they already believed the story. When they finally left, I stayed there, staring at the reflection in the glass wall. The uniform I wore suddenly looked foreign, like it belonged to someone who no longer existed. In that moment, I understood what isolation really was. Not the absence of people, but the realization that every person you once believed in has chosen not to believe in you. The apartment was quiet, too quiet. I sat on the floor, back against the wall, staring at the blank television screen like it owed me answers. My phone lay face down beside me, silent for hours. No one called, no one came. The only sound was the low hum of the fridge and the weight of everything crashing down at once. Then it buzzed. An unlisted number. One line. They're watching the wrong terminal. My breath caught. Ethan Graves. We hadn't spoken in years. Not since he left the teams. But I knew that voice. Steady. Unshaken. The voice you remember in the middle of a firefight. I called back without thinking. He answered on the first ring. Olivia, listen to me, he said. This isn't just sabotage. It's a takedown. I asked. By whom? He paused. Atlantic Sentinel, and your father's helping them. My heart dropped. That's not possible. He didn't argue. He just sent me a file. My hands trembled as I opened it. A financial trail. Payments are routed through shell accounts. Names buried deep in contract language. And one of those names was my father's. I read it twice, hoping I'd misread. He had taken $30,000, labeled as consulting. But Ethan had flagged the contractor. Atlantic Sentinel. A name whispered in defense halls. The kind of name that doesn't appear unless something is about to disappear. I wanted to throw the phone, punch a wall, scream into the void. Instead, I asked Ethan, why me? He said, because you're the audit they can't afford. That sentence hit harder than anything I'd read. I wasn't just collateral. I was the threat. He continued, voice low. They needed your father to legitimize the leak, and he was angry enough to play along. That was when the rage settled into something sharper. Cold. Focused. Ethan said, they don't expect you to fight back. He was wrong about that. I would fight. Not because I wanted revenge, but because someone had to remind them that honor doesn't come with a price tag. And I was done being their scapegoat. I sat at the kitchen table, eyes locked on my laptop, the glow of the screen lighting up everything I was about to risk. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a second. Then I typed the header. Confidential. Internal security breach. Evidence attached. I didn't include names. Just facts. Numbers. Transfers. Timelines. Enough to draw a straight line between Atlantic Sentinel and the setup. I hit send. Heart steady this time. The message wasn't loud, but it was precise. The kind of truth that doesn't need to shout. Then I picked up the second phone. The only 3 people in my life had ever had the number to. Ethan answered before the second ring. We're doing this? He asked. I said, we finish it in Charleston. He laid out the plan while I took notes, if it was just another mission. I wasn't just trying to clear my name anymore. I was going to expose all of it. The corruption, the lies, The men in suits who thought reputations were currency and justice was optional. I was done playing defense. We picked the stage carefully. The Charleston Veterans Tribute Gala. Same lights, same crowd, same cameras. The place where my father had turned me in was about to become the place where I took everything back. I didn't feel scared anymore. I felt ready. I looked at my reflection in the dark window. No uniform, no rank. Just a woman who'd been broken and now chose to rise. "We're not leaking the truth," I told Ethan. "We're lighting it up. And this time, I wouldn't be walking in as someone's daughter. I'd be walking in as the one they couldn't silence." The chandeliers were just as bright as I remembered, casting the same gold light on the marble floor where everything had fallen apart. I walked through the entrance in silence. No fanfare, no introduction. This time, I didn't need a spotlight. I was the storm they hadn't planned for. My father stood at the podium, shaking hands, smiling like the hero of a story no one had questioned yet. He held the microphone with the confidence of a man who had gotten away with everything. "My daughter wears the uniform," he said, voice calm. "But I wear the truth." Then came the sound. Boots. Steady. Measured. A rhythm that silenced the entire room. The double doors burst open, and in marched a full SEAL unit in dress blacks, white gloves tight at their sides. Ethan led them, a sealed folder in hand. Cameras flashed. Guests gasped. He stepped onto the stage without a word, handed the folder to the lead federal agent. "Presidential clearance. Operation Vanguard. Olivia Chandler has full NATO authorization. Charges void." The room froze. A ripple of whispers turned into stunned silence. I looked at my father, his face drained. He reached for his glass, but it slipped from his fingers and shattered on the marble. I stepped forward, slow and certain. "You turned me in for doing the job you taught me to love." His mouth opened, but nothing came out. Ethan raised a hand, and the screens behind us lit up. The payment trail, the emails, a recorded call with a Sentinel executive. My father's name is attached to all of it. No applause followed, just silence, the kind that settles after something heavy finally breaks. I turned to the crowd. "Tonight is about truth, so let's start with it." And for the first time, the room saw me not as a disgrace, but as the one person who never stopped telling the truth. After the crowd had vanished and the lights dimmed, I found him sitting alone on a stone bench behind the venue. His suit was wrinkled, his tie hanging loose, his hands folded like he didn't know what to do with them anymore. He didn't look up when I approached, just stared at the pavement like it held answers he couldn't find. For the first time in my life, I saw him without armor. No anger, no pride. Just a man who had lost the war, he started. "They told me you were dirty," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "Said they had proof. You wanted to believe it," I replied. "It made you feel noble again." He looked at me then, eyes red, jaw trembling. "I just wanted to be right for once." I nodded. "Being right isn't the same as being good, Dad." We sat in silence. No more accusations. No more defenses. Just the quiet weight of truth between us. Then, I said what I came there to say. "I don't need your apology. I don't need revenge. I just need you to stop rewriting who I am." He didn't argue. He just nodded, like something inside him finally gave up the fight. Then I heard footsteps behind us. Soft, familiar. My mother stepped into the light, her hand trembling as she rested it on his shoulder. He broke under her touch, shoulders shaking, breath catching in his throat. She looked at me, eyes full but steady. "You didn't just survive him. You outgrew him." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. In that moment, we understood each other without words. As I walked away, I felt lighter, not because the pain was gone, but because it wasn't running the story anymore. Some people never say they're sorry, but they stop pretending they were right. And sometimes, that's enough. The morning sun spilled softly over the harbor as the veterans' parade moved down the street. Flags waved in the breeze, slow and steady like a heartbeat. I stood quietly among the crowd, a silver star pinned to my jacket, blending in but not unseen. My father stepped to the podium, his old uniform pressed but worn with age. He cleared his throat, voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. "I mistook attention for truth," he said, "and I hurt the person who carried my name further than I ever could." He didn't look at me, but I knew those words were mine to hear. No applause followed, no cheers, just silence. And somehow, it felt heavier than thunder. Not empty, just full of everything left unspoken. I watched him step back, hands trembling at his sides. He didn't smile. He didn't cry. He simply stood there, owning the weight of what he'd done. After the ceremony, he walked up to me slowly, unsure. "You deserved a better father," he said. I nodded once. "I got a better ending." That was all either of us could say. He walked away, and this time, I didn't stop him. I turned toward the harbor, the wind brushing against my face like a clean slate. I reached into my pocket and pulled out an old photo. He is in uniform. I am on his shoulders. I let it go into the water, watching the past sink without a splash. Forgiveness isn't surrender. It's the moment you stop letting someone else's mistake define your worth. As the parade faded behind me, I didn't feel finished. I felt free.